At 2 years old, she lost everything. Her mother walked to the scaffold on a spring morning, and the little girl with coal-black eyes became no one. Stripped of her title, erased from succession, left to survive on the mercy of a court that had murdered her mother. If stories like this bring you comfort as you drift towards sleep, please subscribe to our channel. Also, leave a comment telling us where in the world you're listening from and what time it is now. And she was none other than Elizabeth Tudor. Elizabeth Tudor should have disappeared into history's footnotes. Instead, she became England's greatest queen. The orphaned princess transformed a fractured, bankrupt kingdom into a golden age. She ruled for 45 years without a husband, without an army of her own, with nothing but intelligence and an iron will. How did the forgotten daughter stabilize a dying nation? This is the bedtime biography of Elizabeth I. Chapter 1. The Disappointment. September 7th, 1533. Greenwich Palace sits heavy beneath gray English skies, its tapestries stirring in the river breeze that drifts through open windows. In the royal birthing chamber, Anne Boleyn lies exhausted against silk pillows, her dark hair damp with the labor of bringing new life into a world that has been holding its breath for this moment. The midwives move quietly, efficiently. They wrap the infant in white linen embroidered with Tudor roses. The baby's eyes are already open, coal-black, like her mother's. A shock of red gold hair crowns her small head, unmistakably her father's. She is healthy. She is strong. She is perfect in every way. Except one. She is a girl. Anne Boleyn had been so certain. The astrologers promised a son. The physicians confirmed it. She had felt it in her bones, in the way the child moved within her. Henry VIII had shattered the Christian world for this child, broken with Rome, defied the Pope, declared himself supreme head of the Church of England. He had set aside his first wife, legitimized his eldest daughter Mary, risked civil war and excommunication, all for the son Anne would give him. The son who would secure the Tudor dynasty. The son who would prove that God blessed this marriage. The son who was supposed to justify everything. In another chamber, King Henry VIII receives the news. The chroniclers do not record what crosses his face in that moment. Perhaps nothing shows at all. He has learned, in his 42 years, to control what others see. He sends word that the celebrations planned for a prince's birth should be cancelled, quietly, without fuss. 3 days later, he gives his daughter a magnificent christening. The baby is carried to the Church of the Observant Friars in a mantle of purple velvet. Archbishop Cranmer stands as godfather. The Dowager Duchess of Norfolk and the Dowager Marchioness of Dorset attend as godmothers. A silver font is brought from Canterbury Cathedral, especially for the occasion. Torches line the path from the palace. The child is baptized Elizabeth, named for both her grandmothers, Elizabeth of York and Elizabeth Howard. It is a spectacle of wealth and ceremony, designed to tell the world that this daughter matters, that she is legitimate, that she is heir to England's throne. But in the quiet spaces between the public show, doubt creeps in like fog off the Thames. Anne Boleyn feels it, the whispers in hallways that fall silent when she approaches, the way certain courtiers avoid her eyes. She had promised Henry a son. She had staked everything on that promise. Now, in her arms, she holds a daughter, beautiful, healthy, alive, but still only a daughter. In the royal nursery at Greenwich, baby Elizabeth lies in a cradle carved with Tudor roses and pomegranates. She does not know yet that she is a disappointment. She does not understand that her father wanted someone else entirely. She only knows warmth and milk and the gentle hands of her nurse, Margaret Bryan, who will later write that the infant is as toward a child and as gentle of conditions as ever I knew any in my life. The baby sleeps peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Outside, the September light fades across the Thames. Somewhere in the palace, Henry VIII sits with his thoughts, already wondering when Anne might give him another child. A son this time, surely a son. The little girl with coal-black eyes dreams infant dreams, unaware that the story of her life has already begun, not with celebration, but with quiet, dangerous disappointment. Chapter 2. Motherless at Dawn, May 19th, 1536. The Tower of London wakes to a morning thick with river mist. Inside the ancient fortress, in a room overlooking Tower Green, Anne Boleyn prepares to die. She is 35 years old. She has been Queen of England for 3 years. In 3 years, she has given her husband 1 living daughter and several miscarriages. That daughter is now 2 years and 8 months old, living at Hatfield Palace, 20 miles away, unaware that this morning will change everything. Elizabeth does not know that her mother stands before a French swordsman specially summoned from Calais because Anne requested a blade instead of an axe, believing it would be kinder, quicker, cleaner. Elizabeth does not know that her mother removes her headdress with steady hands, tucks her dark hair beneath a white cap, and kneels on the scaffold with a dignity that silences the watching crowd. Elizabeth knows only that her mother is gone. The official charges against Anne Boleyn are adultery, incest, and treason. The accusations claim she conspired with 5 men, including her own brother. The evidence is flimsy at best, manufactured at worst. But evidence matters less than Henry VIII's certainty that this marriage, like his first, has failed to produce a male heir. He has already chosen his 3rd wife, Jane Seymour, pale and quiet, waiting in the wings. 11 days after Anne's execution, Henry marries Jane. In the eyes of the law, if Anne Boleyn was guilty of adultery, then her marriage to Henry was invalid from the beginning. Parliament obligingly declares it so. With a stroke of legislative ink, Elizabeth Tudor becomes illegitimate. The act of succession removes her from the line of succession. She is no longer Princess Elizabeth. She is simply the Lady Elizabeth, daughter of the king's great mistake. At Hatfield Palace, the little girl continues her routines. She does not yet have words for what has happened. Adults speak in hushed voices around her. Her governess, Margaret Bryan, writes desperate letters to Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief minister, explaining that Elizabeth has outgrown her clothes and has nothing suitable to wear. The household does not know what to do with a child who was a princess yesterday and is nobody today. Elizabeth's half-sister Mary arrives at Hatfield. Mary is 20 years old, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, herself declared illegitimate when Henry set her mother aside. Mary has every reason to hate this child, the daughter of the woman who replaced her mother, the living symbol of her own humiliation. Yet something in the little red-haired girl touches her. Mary is gentle with Elizabeth. In these early years, before religion and politics poison everything, there is affection between the sisters. The household settles into a new normal. Elizabeth's status has changed, but her daily life continues. She learns to walk with unusual steadiness for her age. She learns words, English, and already a smattering of others. Observers note something peculiar about the child. She is too serious, too watchful. At 6 years old, people will remark that she has as much gravity as if she had been 40. Perhaps this is what happens when your mother disappears and no one explains why. Perhaps this is what happens when you learn before you can articulate it that love is dangerous and position is fragile. In 1537, Jane Seymour gives Henry what Anne could not, a son. Edward is born in October, and the kingdom erupts in genuine celebration. Church bells ring across England. Bonfires light the night. Te Deums are sung in every cathedral. At last, the succession is secure. At last, Henry has his heir. Jane Seymour dies 12 days later from childbed fever. Elizabeth, now 4 years old, is brought to her brother's christening. She carries the chrisom, the white baptismal cloth, her small hands carefully holding the precious fabric. She is part of the ceremony, acknowledged, included, though no longer in line for the throne that once was promised her. She learns the hierarchy early. Edward is the prince, the precious boy who will be king. Mary is the elder daughter, Catholic and stubborn, and waiting for rehabilitation. Elizabeth is the youngest, the daughter of the executed queen, the one whose very existence reminds people of scandal and failure. The king does not neglect her entirely. She is educated, clothed, housed appropriately for a nobleman's daughter, if not a princess. But she is not loved. How can Henry look at her without seeing Anne? How can he hold her without remembering his failure? Elizabeth learns to read the silences. She learns which questions not to ask. She learns that survival means making yourself useful without making yourself vulnerable, present without being presumptuous. At Hatfield Palace, she studies her lessons with unusual intensity. Books become a fortress. Knowledge becomes armor. Languages, theology, philosophy, history, she devours them all with a hunger that impresses her tutors and unnerves the adults around her. The little girl with coal black eyes is learning the first great lesson of her life. Trust no one completely, reveal nothing fully, and remember that everything can be taken away in a single morning. The scent of old parchment and ink becomes more familiar than any mother's embrace ever was. Chapter 3. The Scholar's Path. The year is 1544, and Hatfield Palace has become a schoolroom. In a chamber lined with books, 11-year-old Elizabeth Tudor bends over a manuscript, her quill scratching across parchment with careful precision. The morning light filters through leaded windows, illuminating dust motes that dance in the air like thoughts taking visible form. Her tutor, William Grindal, watches with quiet satisfaction. He is a young man himself, only in his 20s, a protégé of the great humanist scholar Roger Ascham. Grindal possesses both patience and ambition, qualities essential for teaching a girl who absorbs knowledge like parchment absorbs ink, who asks questions that would challenge university scholars, who seems determined to prove something to a world that has already dismissed her. Elizabeth can already write in English, Latin, and Italian. Under Grindal's careful instruction, she is progressing rapidly in French and Greek. These are not the ornamental accomplishments expected of noble women, a little French for conversation, perhaps some Latin for prayer. This is serious scholarship, the education of princes, the training of minds meant to govern. When Grindal asks her to translate a passage from Cicero, she does not simply render the Latin into English. She considers the rhythm, the rhetoric, the political context in which the Roman orator spoke. She understands that words are weapons, that language shapes reality, that those who master communication master power itself. Perhaps she learned this from her mother. Anne Boleyn was educated, sharp-tongued, capable of holding her own in theological debates with scholars and bishops. It did not save her, but Elizabeth is learning a different lesson, not that knowledge is useless, but that knowledge alone is insufficient. One must also know when to speak and when to remain silent, when to display brilliance and when to hide it. Her days follow a rigorous pattern. She rises early, before the household fully stirs. Morning prayers, conducted in Latin. Then lessons, hours of them, interrupted only for meals and brief exercise walking in the gardens. She studies classical texts, Cicero, Livy, Plutarch, Tacitus. She reads theological works, absorbing the debates that are tearing Europe apart. Protestant reformers and Catholic defenders wage war on paper, and Elizabeth reads both sides with careful neutrality. She learns Greek from Homer and the New Testament. She learns Italian from Petrarch and Castiglione. She learns French from contemporary writers and old romances. By 12 years old, she can move fluidly between languages, thinking in one, writing in another, speaking in a third. In 1544, she prepares a New Year's gift for her father, a translation of Catherine Parr's devotional work, Prayers or Meditations, rendered from English into Italian, Latin, and French. It is an extraordinary accomplishment for a 12-year-old, and more than that, it is a strategic masterstroke. She demonstrates her learning, honors her stepmother, and reminds her father that she exists and has value. The manuscript is beautifully bound, the calligraphy precise, the translations accurate. Henry receives it with what might be pleasure. It is hard to know what Henry feels about this daughter who looks so much like her mother, who carries herself with Anne's intelligence and intensity, but has learned Anne's caution too late to save her. Catherine Parr, Henry's sixth and final wife, shows Elizabeth genuine kindness. Catherine herself is learned, interested in theology and reform, a woman who publishes her own devotional writings. Under her influence, the king's household becomes a place where intellectual women can flourish, at least within careful boundaries. When William Grindal dies suddenly in 1548, Elizabeth is devastated. She has lost a teacher, a guide, perhaps one of the few people she trusted. But grief must be managed, contained, useful. She writes to Catherine Parr, requesting that Roger Ascham, Grindal's own teacher, become her new tutor. Ascham accepts, and under his instruction, Elizabeth's education deepens further. Ascham is brilliant, demanding, and utterly devoted to humanist learning. He believes education shapes character, that studying the classics creates moral and intellectual excellence. With Elizabeth, he finds a pupil beyond his highest expectations. They read Greek together every morning, beginning with the New Testament and moving to classical authors. Ascham later writes that Elizabeth's mind is exceptional, her memory phenomenal, her judgment mature beyond her years. She speaks Latin as readily and easily as English, and her Greek is better than most scholars, twice her age. But Ascham notices something else. Elizabeth is not studying for pleasure, though she takes pleasure in it. She is studying for survival. Every language is a tool of diplomacy. Every historical text is a manual of statecraft. Every philosophical argument is training for the debates that will someday determine whether she lives or dies. She is particularly drawn to Tacitus, the Roman historian who wrote about emperors and tyranny, about survival in dangerous courts. She translates his annals, absorbing lessons about power, betrayal, and the masks that rulers must wear. Decades later, scholars will confirm that one of the few surviving English translations of Tacitus from this period is in Elizabeth's own hand. Her script, her analysis, her careful consideration of how empires rise and fall. In the evenings, after formal lessons end, she sometimes plays the virginals, an early harpsichord. Music is another language, and she learns it well. She embroiders, as women are expected to do, her needle pulling thread through fabric in patterns of flowers and vines. Her hands are always busy, her mind always working. The household at Hatfield sees a girl who is studious, reserved, perhaps a little cold. They do not see the calculations behind those coal-black eyes. They do not understand that every lesson is armor, every book a shield, every skill a weapon she is forging against a future she cannot predict, but knows will be dangerous. Night falls across Hatfield. In her chamber, Elizabeth extinguishes her candle and lies in the darkness, conjugating Greek verbs in her mind until sleep finally comes. Chapter 4. Dangerous Affections. January 1547. King Henry VIII dies, bloated and diseased, after 38 years on the throne. His 9-year-old son becomes Edward VI, and England falls under the control of a regency council dominated by ambitious men who see the young king as a path to power. One of these men is Thomas Seymour, the late king's brother-in-law, uncle to the new king, and a man whose charm masks a reckless ambition that will prove deadly. 13-year-old Elizabeth goes to live with her stepmother, Catherine Parr, the king's widow. It should be a time of peace, of recovery from the tension of Henry's final years. Catherine is kind to Elizabeth, genuinely fond of the serious, scholarly girl who speaks 6 languages and reads Greek before breakfast. Then Catherine, barely months into her widowhood, marries Thomas Seymour in secret. Seymour is handsome, charismatic, everything a courtier should be on the surface. He jokes with Elizabeth, compliments her, pays her the kind of attention she has rarely received from men. For a girl who lost her mother to an executioner's blade and whose father barely acknowledged her existence, this attention is intoxicating and confusing in equal measure. But Seymour's attentions cross boundaries that should never be crossed. He enters Elizabeth's bedchamber in the mornings, sometimes before she is dressed. He engages in what he calls playful roughhousing, tickling, chasing, slapping her on the back or buttocks. Once, he attempts to kiss her while she is still in bed. Another time, in the garden, he cuts her black gown into 100 pieces, while Catherine holds her down, all 3 of them supposedly laughing at the game. Elizabeth's governess, Cat Ashley, is alarmed but unsure how to protect her charge without causing scandal. Catherine Parr is present for some of these incidents, participating even, perhaps believing that her presence makes them innocent, or perhaps unable to admit to herself what her new husband is doing. Elizabeth responds the way she has learned to respond to danger. She becomes careful, watchful, calculating her movements. She rises earlier, so she is already dressed when Seymour arrives. She avoids being alone with him. She says nothing that could be used against her. In the summer of 1548, Catherine discovers Seymour embracing Elizabeth. The circumstances are unclear. Was it consensual? Was it forced? Was it somewhere in the complicated territory between? What is clear is that Catherine, hurt and angry, sends Elizabeth away. Elizabeth leaves for Cheshunt, to the household of Sir Anthony Denny. She is 14 years old, and she has learned another brutal lesson. Even innocent affection can destroy you. Even the appearance of impropriety can be weaponized. In September 1548, Catherine Parr dies in childbirth, her last words to her husband bitter with betrayal. Thomas Seymour, now free of his wife, grows bolder in his ambitions. He plots to marry Elizabeth, which would give him a claim to influence, if not the throne itself. He attempts to gain control of the young King Edward. He builds a network of supporters and hoards weapons at his estates. In January 1549, the Privy Council arrests him for treason. During the investigation, Elizabeth is interrogated. The questions are pointed, humiliating, designed to trap her into admitting something that could be used to exclude her from the succession, or worse. Did she consent to marry Seymour? Did she encourage his advances? Was she complicit in his plots? Elizabeth, barely 15, faces her interrogators with the composure of someone twice her age. She admits nothing. She reveals nothing. She expresses appropriate horror at Seymour's treason, while carefully avoiding any statement that could implicate her. When Seymour is executed in March 1549, Elizabeth reportedly says, "This day died a man of much wit and very little judgment." The words are cold, dismissive, perfectly calibrated to distance herself from scandal. But in her private chambers at Hatfield, perhaps she allows herself a moment of something else: relief, grief, anger at the adult world that puts children in impossible positions and then punishes them for the consequences. She is 15 years old, and she has survived another test. But the lessons are accumulating, hardening into something like armor around her heart. Chapter 5. A Sister's Reign of Fire. July 1553. Edward VI, the boy king who never had a chance to become a man, dies of tuberculosis at the age of 15. His final act, manipulated by the Duke of Northumberland, is to attempt to divert the succession away from his Catholic half-sister Mary and toward Lady Jane Grey, a Protestant cousin. It fails spectacularly. Within 9 days, Mary Tudor enters London in triumph. The people line the streets to cheer her, not because they love Catholicism necessarily, but because they believe in legitimate succession, and Mary is Henry VIII's eldest child. She is the rightful queen, and England will have her. Elizabeth, now 19, greets her sister with appropriate deference. She kneels, she pledges loyalty, she expresses joy at Mary's accession. And perhaps some of it is genuine. Mary has been kind to her in childhood, protective even. They are sisters, daughters of the same difficult father, both declared illegitimate and later restored to succession. They should understand each other, but they do not. Mary is 37, embittered by years of humiliation, determined to undo her father's religious revolution and return England to Catholic Rome. She sees her accession as divine providence, a mandate to save English souls from Protestant heresy. Elizabeth, raised Protestant under Edward's reign, represents everything Mary fears and resents. Elizabeth is young, popular, the focus of Protestant hopes. Elizabeth is Anne Boleyn's daughter, the child of the woman who displaced Mary's mother, the living symbol of the break with Rome. Mary insists Elizabeth attend Catholic Mass. Elizabeth complies, but reluctantly, claiming illness, performing the rituals with visible discomfort. She walks a razor's edge, obedient enough to avoid open rebellion, resistant enough to remain credible to Protestant supporters. It is a performance that satisfies no one and endangers her constantly. In July 1554, Mary marries Philip II of Spain, 11 years her junior, heir to the most powerful Catholic empire in the world. England erupts in protest. A rebellion led by Sir Thomas Wyatt attempts to prevent the marriage and place Elizabeth on the throne instead. Elizabeth claims to know nothing about the rebellion. She is at Ashridge, sick with what might be genuine illness or might be strategic retreat. When Wyatt's forces march on London, she remains absent, sending messages of loyalty to Mary, while carefully avoiding any action that could be construed as support for the rebels. Wyatt is defeated. Under torture, he mentions Elizabeth's name, though he insists she was not directly involved. It hardly matters. Mary's counselors see the rebellion as proof that Elizabeth is a threat, a Protestant magnet for every conspiracy, a living alternative to Mary's increasingly unpopular reign. On March 18, 1554, Elizabeth is brought to the Tower of London. She enters through Traitor's Gate, the water entrance, where so many have passed before her on their way to execution. Her mother entered here. Catherine Howard entered here. Now Elizabeth, wearing a white dress that emphasizes her youth and innocence, steps onto the rain-wet stones and speaks words that will be remembered for centuries. Here landeth as true a subject as ever landed at these stairs. The words are defiant and careful, loyal and resistant, a masterpiece of ambiguity. She is a subject. She acknowledges Mary's authority, but she is a true subject. She insists on her innocence. She is imprisoned in the same fortress where her mother died 18 years earlier. The same stone walls, the same river sounds, the same spring air carrying the scent of death and possibility. Elizabeth is 20 years old, and she does not know if she will leave the tower alive. Her interrogators press her. They search her letters, question her servants, look for any evidence of complicity in Wyatt's rebellion. They find nothing conclusive. Elizabeth gives them nothing. She answers questions with questions, admits ignorance of plots, expresses horror at rebellion, maintains her loyalty while revealing nothing that could condemn her. She is kept in the Tower for 2 months. Then she is moved to house arrest at Woodstock, where she scratches words on a window with a diamond ring. Much suspected by me, nothing proved can be. Meanwhile, Mary's reign descends into religious terror. The Queen is determined to eradicate Protestantism by fire. The burnings begin in February 1555. Men and women are burned alive at Smithfield, at Oxford, in towns across England. Nearly 300 people will die in the flames during Mary's 5-year reign, earning her the name that will echo through history, Bloody Mary. Elizabeth watches from her confinement. She conforms outwardly to Catholic worship, attends Mass when required, says nothing that could be used against her. But she also does nothing to enthusiastically embrace the faith Mary is enforcing with such violence. She remains ambiguous, uncommitted, impossible to pin down. The Protestant martyrs become heroes, their deaths creating a legacy of resistance that will define England's religious identity for generations. Elizabeth does not join them in martyrdom. She survives instead, learning patience, learning silence, learning that the living can achieve more than the dead ever can. Mary's health deteriorates. Her phantom pregnancies embarrass the kingdom. Her husband, Philip, spends as little time as possible in England. She becomes isolated, bitter, increasingly unpopular, and slowly, inevitably, attention turns to her heir. Elizabeth remains at Hatfield, reading, studying, waiting. She learns that survival sometimes means compromise, that purity is a luxury for those who do not bear the weight of consequence. She learns to live with moral complexity, with the gap between what she believes and what she must do. The fires burn at Smithfield, and Elizabeth counts the days until her sister's heart finally gives out beneath the weight of failure and fanatic faith. Chapter 6. The Summons, November 17th, 1558. Hatfield Palace sits quiet in the gray autumn morning. Elizabeth is in the gardens, her book open on her lap, though she has not turned a page in some time. The oak tree above her drops occasional leaves, gold and brown, drifting down to settle on her black velvet gown. She is 25 years old. She has survived her sister's reign by staying silent, staying careful, staying alive. Mary has been ill for months, the court consumed by the question of succession. Elizabeth has said nothing, committed to nothing. made no plans that could be discovered and used against her. The sound of hoofbeats on the drive breaks the morning stillness. Riders from London, their horses lathered with sweat from hard riding. Elizabeth rises, her book forgotten on the bench. Her household gathers, sensing that the moment they have been waiting for, fearing and hoping for, has finally arrived. The messengers kneel. One of them, his voice rough with emotion and exhaustion, speaks the words that change everything. Your Majesty, Mary Tudor is dead. Elizabeth stands very still. The chroniclers will later report that she spoke words from Psalm 118. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Perhaps she did. Perhaps in that moment of overwhelming relief and terror, Scripture was the only language adequate to contain what she felt. She is Queen of England. The news spreads through Hatfield Palace, like fire through dry grass. Servants rush to prepare chambers. Messengers are dispatched to London. The household that served a princess under suspicion must now serve a queen. Everything changes in the space between one heartbeat and the next. But Elizabeth understands what others, in their joy and celebration, might not yet grasp. She has not inherited a throne. She has inherited a catastrophe. England in November 1558 is a nation on its knees. The treasury is bankrupt. Debts of $227,000 owed to foreign creditors, primarily the Antwerp Exchange, which charges 14% interest. The crown has no money, no credit, no resources to meet its obligations. Mary's religious persecution has left the country bitterly divided, neighbor turned against neighbor, families split between Catholic and Protestant loyalty. 300 people burned alive. The memory of those fires will not fade for generations. The war with France has been a disaster. In January, England lost Calais, its last possession on the continent, held for 200 years, a symbol of English power and prestige. Mary reportedly said that when she died, they would find Calais written on her heart. Now it is gone, and England is diminished, humiliated, vulnerable. Abroad, England is isolated and despised. Catholic Europe sees Elizabeth as illegitimate, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, whose marriage to Henry VIII the Pope never recognized. France supports Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, as the rightful heir to England's throne. Spain is the most powerful empire in the world, and its king, Philip II, Mary's widower, will decide soon whether England is worth protecting or conquering. At home, the nobility is fractured by faction. Some are Catholic, loyal to the old faith, suspicious of this Protestant queen. Some are Protestant radicals, returned from exile in Geneva and Frankfurt, eager to purge England of every Catholic remnant. Some are simply opportunists, waiting to see which way the wind blows before declaring their allegiance. Elizabeth has no army she can truly trust, no navy ready for war, no husband to lend his strength and legitimacy to her rule, no son to secure the succession and quiet the constant speculation about what happens when she dies. She is a woman in a world that believes women are unfit to rule. She is 25 years old with no experience in governance. She is the daughter of an executed queen, raised in confinement, educated in survival rather than statecraft. Everything is against her. Everything. And yet, standing in the gardens at Hatfield on this November morning, Elizabeth makes her first decision as queen. It is a decision that will define her reign and shape the next 45 years of English history. She summons William Cecil. Cecil is 48 years old, a career administrator who served her father and brother, who survived Mary's reign by keeping his head down and his Protestant sympathies private. He is brilliant, cautious, methodical. a man who understands bureaucracy and finance, who can navigate the treacherous waters of factional politics, who believes in Protestant reform, but is pragmatic enough to implement it gradually. Elizabeth has known Cecil for years. She trusts him as much as she trusts anyone, which is to say, carefully and with conditions. When he arrives at Hatfield, she makes him her principal secretary, the most powerful position in her government. She speaks words that will be recorded and remembered. This judgment I have of you, that you will not be corrupted with any manner of gift, and that you will be faithful to the state. Cecil kneels and pledges his loyalty. He will serve her for the next 40 years, until his death in 1598. Their partnership will be the bedrock of Elizabethan stability, not always harmonious, often contentious, but fundamentally aligned in purpose. Elizabeth begins forming her Privy Council. She keeps it small, 19 men, carefully chosen to balance factions and talents. Some are Protestant reformers, some are moderate Catholics willing to serve a Protestant queen. She needs both. She needs stability more than ideological purity. She makes other decisions in those first days. She will not rush to London immediately. She will wait, let the city settle, let the transition happen with order rather than chaos. She will plan her coronation carefully, making it a spectacle that announces her legitimacy and authority to a skeptical world. She writes letters to foreign courts, announcing her accession, assuring them of her peaceful intentions while revealing nothing of her religious plans. She needs time. She needs space to maneuver. She needs everyone to underestimate her just a little while longer. At night, in her private chambers, perhaps Elizabeth allows herself a moment of fear. The weight of what she has inherited must be crushing. The probability of failure must seem overwhelming. Queens do not last long in England. Her cousin Jane Grey ruled for 9 days before execution. Her sister Mary ruled 5 years of increasing misery and isolation. How does a woman survive on a throne designed for men? How does a Protestant queen unite a country torn apart by religion? How does an inexperienced ruler restore a bankrupt nation's finances and international standing? Elizabeth does not know the answers yet, but she knows one thing with absolute certainty: she will not fail. She will not burn out like Mary. She will not be overthrown like Jane. She will not be executed like her mother. She will endure. She will adapt. She will survive. The real work begins now. Chapter 7. The Middle Way, January 1559. Westminster Palace hums with nervous energy as Parliament assembles for the first time in Elizabeth's reign. The great hall fills with nobles, bishops, and members of the Commons, men who represent a nation still bleeding from religious wounds, a country exhausted by theological warfare, a people who have been Catholic, then Protestant, then Catholic again in the space of a single generation. Elizabeth sits in preparation for what will be the defining challenge of her young reign. She must decide England's religious future. Will she return to her brother Edward's aggressive Protestantism? Will she maintain her sister Mary's Catholicism? Or will she find some third path that no one yet imagines? The pressure is immense from all sides. Protestant exiles, returned from Geneva and Frankfurt, where they sheltered during Mary's reign, demand a complete reformation. They want churches stripped of popish decoration, clergy purged of Catholic sympathies, the Book of Common Prayer revised to remove any hint of traditional worship. Some even question whether a woman can legitimately lead the church at all. Catholic bishops, who dominated Mary's church, resist any change. They have the majority in the House of Lords. They believe they can block Protestant legislation, or at least water it down to meaninglessness. They expect Elizabeth to be weak, to compromise, to perhaps even return to Rome if pressured sufficiently. Elizabeth surprises them all. She begins with a carefully calculated gesture. On Christmas Day 1558, she attends Mass at Westminster Abbey, but walks out before the elevation of the host, the moment when, in Catholic theology, bread and wine become the literal body and blood of Christ. The message is clear. She will not embrace full Catholic doctrine, but she also does not make a spectacle of rejection. She simply leaves, quietly, sending ripples of speculation through every court in Europe. In her first parliament, she introduces two bills, the Act of Supremacy and the Act of Uniformity. Together, they will reshape English Christianity for centuries. The Act of Supremacy reasserts the Crown's authority over the Church of England, breaking once again with papal Rome. But there is a subtle, crucial difference from her father's version. Henry VIII declared himself supreme head of the Church. Elizabeth, sensitive to Protestant objections about a woman leading the Church and wishing to avoid theological controversy, styles herself supreme governor. The distinction seems minor. It is anything but. Governor suggests administrative authority without claiming spiritual headship. It allows Protestant theologians to accept her leadership without compromising their beliefs about church hierarchy. It gives her power without requiring her to claim divine authority she knows will be challenged. The bill requires all clergy and royal office holders to swear an oath of supremacy, acknowledging Elizabeth as governor and rejecting papal authority. Those who refuse will lose their positions. It is a loyalty test designed to identify who can accept the new order and who cannot. The Act of Uniformity addresses the more immediate question: how will English people actually worship? Elizabeth revives the Book of Common Prayer, last used during Edward VI's reign, but she chooses the 1552 version with strategic modifications. The book establishes English as the language of worship. No more Latin Mass for the common people who cannot understand it. Services will follow a prescribed form, creating uniformity across the kingdom. Churches will be places of Protestant worship, but Elizabeth insists on concessions to traditional sensibilities. She allows clergy to wear vestments, the ceremonial robes that Protestants consider too popish. She permits churches to retain some of their visual beauty, ornaments, crosses, even some imagery, rather than stripping them bare as Geneva reformers demand. The communion service is worded ambiguously, allowing both Catholics and Protestants to interpret Christ's presence in the elements according to their own theology. It is a masterpiece of deliberate vagueness. Elizabeth is creating what she will call a via media, a middle way between Catholic ritual and Protestant simplicity, between Rome's authority and Geneva's radicalism. She is betting that most English people, exhausted by religious extremism, will accept a moderate settlement that allows them to worship in peace. Parliament erupts in debate. In the House of Lords, the Catholic bishops resist fiercely. They see the bills as heresy, as betrayal of the true faith, as the damnation of English souls. The Bishop of Chester argues that women cannot govern the Church, citing Scripture and tradition. The bishops vote as a bloc against the legislation. But Elizabeth has prepared the ground carefully. She has allies in the Commons, where Protestant sympathies run stronger. She has supporters among the lay nobles in the Lords who are more interested in political stability than theological purity. And she has something else: the absence of several Catholic bishops who have died or been detained, weakening the opposition. On Easter weekend 1559, she stages a theological debate between Catholic and Protestant divines. It is supposed to be a fair hearing of both positions. Instead, it becomes a trap. When two Catholic bishops refuse to follow the prescribed format and speak out of turn, Elizabeth's council charges them with contempt and sends them to the Tower of London. With her opponents imprisoned, the political calculation shifts. When Parliament reconvenes in April, the resistance has weakened. The Act of Supremacy passes the Lords by just 3 votes. The Act of Uniformity follows. By May 8, 1559, both have received royal assent. Elizabeth has her religious settlement, but legislation is only the beginning. She must now implement it across a kingdom where local loyalties, personal beliefs, and regional traditions will resist change. She issues royal injunctions, 57 detailed regulations that fill in the details of how the settlement will work in practice. Churches must remove superstitious images and relics, but may retain crosses and candlesticks. Clergy must obtain licenses to preach, ensuring quality control and political reliability. Pilgrimages are banned. They smack too much of Catholic devotion to saints. The Bible must be available in English in every church. Communion tables replace stone altars, but their placement is left deliberately ambiguous. Church music is preserved. Elizabeth loves the beauty of choral worship, the compositions of William Byrd and Thomas Tallis. This is not Geneva, where even harmony is suspect. England will have a church that appeals to the senses as well as the mind, that offers beauty alongside doctrine. Most crucially, Elizabeth articulates a principle that will define her approach to religion for 45 years. She will not, she declares, make windows into men's souls. She does not care what people believe privately, only how they behave publicly. Attend the state church, conform outwardly, and she will not investigate your inner convictions. It is a revolutionary idea in an age of religious warfare. Across Europe, rulers demand not just obedience, but belief, prosecuting thought crimes and heresy with brutal efficiency. Elizabeth asks only for conformity, for peace, for a nation that can worship together even if they believe differently. Of course, it is not truly tolerance. Those who refuse outward conformity will face fines, imprisonment, eventually harsher penalties. Catholics who openly practice their faith, who harbor priests or attend secret masses, will be hunted as traitors. Protestant radicals who demand further reformation will be silenced. The middle way requires everyone to stay in the middle, and those on the extremes will suffer. But for most English people, weary of burning and persecution, the settlement offers something precious: stability. A church they can attend without fear, a form of worship that does not demand martyrdom or exile, a queen who asks for loyalty rather than zealotry. The bishops who refuse to swear the oath of supremacy are removed from their positions. All but one resign rather than conform. Elizabeth appoints new bishops. Matthew Parker becomes Archbishop of Canterbury, leading a new Protestant hierarchy. The transition is swift, decisive, and relatively bloodless. By the summer of 1559, England is officially Protestant again, but it is a Protestantism unlike any other in Europe, moderate, ceremonial, comprehensive, designed to include as many people as possible rather than exclude them for insufficient purity. Elizabeth has threaded an impossible needle. She has created a religious settlement that will survive with modifications for centuries. The Church of England, Anglican, neither fully Catholic nor fully Reformed, is born. At night, in her private chapel, Elizabeth kneels before a crucifix with candles burning on either side. Protestant visitors are scandalized. Catholic observers take hope. Elizabeth prays, revealing nothing of what she truly believes, keeping her soul's windows firmly shuttered. The middle way is established. The fires of Smithfield are cold. England, for the first time in a generation, can breathe without fearing that the wrong prayer will mean death. Chapter 8. The Marriage. Question. From the moment Elizabeth becomes queen, the question consumes her court, her council, and every royal house in Europe. Whom will she marry? It is not merely curiosity. It is urgent political necessity. Elizabeth is 25 years old, unmarried, with no heir. If she dies without children, England descends into civil war over succession. A queen must marry. A queen must produce sons. This is the fundamental duty of female monarchy, the absolute requirement for stability. Elizabeth knows this. Her counselors remind her constantly. Parliament petitions her repeatedly. Foreign ambassadors arrive with proposals from princes, archdukes, and kings. The marriage market opens, and Elizabeth is the greatest prize in Europe, a queen in her own right, ruler of a kingdom that, despite its current weaknesses, sits at a strategic crossroads of European power. The suitors arrive in careful sequence. First is Philip II of Spain, her dead sister's widower. He proposes within days of Mary's death, offering to transfer his affections from one sister to the next, as easily as changing a doublet. Philip is the most powerful man in Europe, ruler of Spain and its vast New World empire, commander of armies that dwarf England's forces. Marriage to Philip would bring protection, wealth, alliance with the dominant Catholic power. Elizabeth considers the offer with appropriate seriousness, then declines with diplomatic grace. She cannot marry her sister's husband, she explains. It would dishonor Mary's memory. The real reasons she keeps to herself. Philip would expect her to return England to Catholic Rome, to become a vassal of Spanish power, to surrender the independence she has only just claimed. Next comes Eric XIV of Sweden, who sends ambassadors with portraits and promises. Elizabeth entertains the suit, but never seriously considers it. Sweden is too distant, too weak, too strategically irrelevant. She uses the negotiations to buy time, to keep other suitors interested, to maintain the appearance of seeking a husband while committing to none. The Archduke Charles of Austria offers a politically advantageous match. Habsburg power without Spanish dominance, a moderate Catholic who might accept religious compromise. Elizabeth negotiates seriously for months, asking detailed questions about his appearance, his temperament, his willingness to allow Protestant worship. She requests his portrait. She considers. She delays. Eventually the discussions collapse over religion and the question of whether Charles would even live in England. But these foreign princes are diplomatic abstractions. The real drama plays out much closer to home, with Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. Dudley is tall, handsome, charming, everything a courtier should be. He is also Elizabeth's childhood friend, companion from the dangerous years under Mary's reign, the man who knows her better than anyone. He rides with her, dances with her, speaks with her for hours in private. The court watches and whispers. Foreign ambassadors report to their governments that the Queen is in love. Perhaps she is. Perhaps for the only time in her life, Elizabeth feels what other women feel, the pull of desire, the warmth of genuine affection, the possibility of a marriage based on something other than political calculation. But Dudley is already married. His wife, Amy Robsart, lives in the country, away from court, reportedly ill. In September 1560, Amy is found dead at the bottom of a staircase at Cumnor Place, her neck broken. The inquest rules it an accident. Rumors immediately swirl that Dudley murdered her to free himself to marry the Queen. Whether Elizabeth believes the rumors or not, she understands the political reality. She cannot marry Dudley now. To do so would confirm every suspicion, would make her look like an adulteress complicit in murder, would destroy her reputation and her throne. The woman who must maintain absolute moral authority cannot afford even the appearance of scandal. So she keeps Dudley close, makes him Earl of Leicester, showers him with gifts and positions, allows him intimacies that shock foreign visitors. But she does not marry him. She transforms what might have been romantic love into something more politically useful. Devoted companionship, loyal service, the appearance of availability without the reality of commitment. Parliament grows desperate. In 1563, they petition her to marry and settle the succession. Elizabeth's response is a masterpiece of deflection. She values their concern, she tells them. She hopes to have children. She may yet marry, if God wills it, and a suitable match can be found. But she will not be rushed, will not be pressured, will not surrender her choice to their anxiety. In private moments with her ladies, she speaks more plainly. "If I were a milkmaid with a pail on mine arm," she says, "I would not forsake that single state to match myself with the greatest monarch." The words reveal what she has learned from watching her father's marriages, her mother's execution, her sister's miserable union with Philip. Marriage for a queen means surrendering power to a husband who, by law and custom, becomes the true ruler. It means risking death in childbed, as 3 of her father's wives discovered. It means becoming a vessel for someone else's ambitions rather than pursuing her own. Elizabeth chooses differently. She will be courted but never caught, desired but never possessed, the eternal virgin queen who belongs to no man and therefore can belong fully to England. The marriage question becomes her most powerful diplomatic tool, wielded with increasing skill as the years pass. But it also becomes her greatest vulnerability, the question that never quite goes away, the source of endless speculation and worry. For now, she remains unmarried, unattached, and utterly in control of her own destiny. Chapter 9. Restoring the Coffers. The ledgers tell a grim story. In the first weeks of Elizabeth's reign, her financial advisors lay out the numbers with brutal honesty. England owes $227,000 to foreign creditors, primarily the Antwerp Exchange. The interest rate is 14%. The Crown's annual revenue barely covers basic expenses, let alone debt repayment. Previous wars, Mary's religious persecutions, and general mismanagement have left the treasury empty, credit exhausted, and the kingdom's financial reputation in ruins. Elizabeth examines the figures with the same careful attention she once gave to translating Cicero. She understands that power without money is an illusion, that armies require pay, that diplomacy requires gifts, that even the appearance of majesty requires funds for clothing, entertainment, and display. A bankrupt queen is a vulnerable queen. She makes her first crucial decision. Frugality will be her watchword. While other monarchs spend lavishly to project power, Elizabeth will spend carefully, strategically, grudgingly. She will be criticized for parsimony, mocked for counting pennies, but she will not bankrupt her kingdom for the sake of appearances. Her second decision is equally important. She appoints the right person to implement this vision. Sir Thomas Gresham becomes her financial advisor, a merchant and financier who understands international banking, currency exchange, and the mechanics of credit. Gresham is practical, experienced, and shares Elizabeth's instinct that financial stability is the foundation of all other power. Together they begin the slow work of restoration, Gresham negotiates with the Antwerp creditors, restructuring debt, securing better terms, gradually paying down the principal while managing the interest. It is unglamorous work, requiring patience and precision rather than dramatic gestures. But it is essential. Each payment improves England's credit. Each renegotiation reduces the burden on future revenues. Elizabeth cuts expenses ruthlessly. The royal household, bloated under previous monarchs, is trimmed. Unnecessary positions are eliminated. Lavish ceremonies are reduced. Gifts to courtiers are given with a careful eye to political necessity rather than generous impulse. She wears her dresses for years, having them altered and re-embroidered rather than commissioning new ones constantly. Her personal frugality becomes legendary and sometimes resented, but it saves money. She avoids expensive wars. This is perhaps her greatest financial achievement and her most controversial policy. Her counselors constantly urge military intervention, to support Protestant rebels in Scotland, to aid Dutch Protestants fighting Spanish occupation, to challenge French power, to defend English interests in Ireland. Elizabeth listens, considers, and usually finds reasons to delay, to negotiate, to send minimal aid rather than committing to full-scale war. It makes her seem weak, indecisive, cowardly even. Male monarchs prove their strength through military conquest. Elizabeth proves hers through survival and solvency. She knows that wars consume treasure faster than any other enterprise, that even victorious campaigns leave kingdoms impoverished, that military glory is expensive and its benefits often illusory. But frugality alone cannot restore a kingdom's finances. Elizabeth also needs revenue. In 1565, Gresham achieves one of his greatest accomplishments, the founding of the Royal Exchange in London. Modeled on the Bourse in Antwerp, the Royal Exchange becomes the center of English commercial life, a place where merchants can meet, trade, borrow, and lend. Elizabeth grants it her royal seal, lending prestige to commerce, signaling that trade is not beneath royal dignity but essential to national prosperity. The exchange transforms London into a financial center. It attracts merchants from across Europe, facilitates the growth of English trade, and generates customs revenue that flows into the royal coffers. It is an investment in infrastructure that pays dividends for generations. Elizabeth also exploits other revenue sources with careful attention to what her subjects will tolerate. She sells crown lands when necessary, though sparingly. Land sold today cannot generate rent tomorrow. She grants monopolies to favored courtiers, giving them exclusive rights to trade in certain goods in exchange for fees. The system becomes corrupt and unpopular, but it raises money without requiring parliamentary taxes. Parliamentary taxation is the most sensitive issue. English tradition holds that the monarch should live of her own, fund ordinary government from crown revenues, and only request parliamentary grants for extraordinary expenses like wars. Elizabeth respects this tradition, rarely asking Parliament for money and keeping her requests modest when she does. This restraint preserves her relationship with Parliament and maintains the fiction that she is not burdening her subjects with excessive taxation. The economy itself begins to cooperate. Transatlantic trade expands, bringing new wealth to English merchants and new customs revenue to the crown. Francis Drake and other privateers raid Spanish treasure ships, and Elizabeth takes her share of the plunder while publicly maintaining that these are private ventures she cannot control. The profits are substantial. Drake's circumnavigation of the globe from 1577 to 1580 brings back treasure worth perhaps $600,000, more than the entire national debt Elizabeth inherited. The strategy works. By 1574, just 16 years into her reign, the debt is cleared. The crown accounts show a surplus. England's credit is restored. Foreign creditors, once wary of English promises, now compete to lend to the English crown at reasonable rates. 10 years later, in 1584, the surplus reaches $300,000. Elizabeth has transformed a bankrupt kingdom into a solvent one, not through conquest or windfall, but through careful management, strategic restraint, and relentless attention to the unglamorous details of revenue and expenditure. The achievement is remarkable and largely invisible. There are no monuments to fiscal responsibility, no songs celebrating balanced budgets. But Elizabeth understands what many of her contemporaries miss. Financial stability enables everything else. It funds the navy that will defeat the Spanish Armada. It supports the intelligence network that prevents Catholic plots. It maintains the court that becomes a center of cultural flowering. It buys time for the religious settlement to take root. It creates the breathing room that allows England to survive and eventually thrive. At night, reviewing accounts by candlelight, Elizabeth signs off on expenditures with a careful hand. Every pound matters. Every saving accumulates. The daughter who inherited debts is building a legacy of solvency, one careful decision at a time. The ledgers tell a new story now. One of recovery, stability, and the quiet power of financial discipline. Chapter 10. The Scottish Problem, May 1568. A small boat crosses the Solway Firth from Scotland to England, carrying a passenger whose arrival will haunt Elizabeth for the next 19 years. Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, steps onto English soil wearing borrowed clothes. Her royal dignity intact despite her desperate circumstances. She has fled her own kingdom after her husband's murder, a hasty remarriage to the suspected killer, forced abdication, imprisonment, and a failed attempt to regain her throne. She comes to England seeking refuge from her cousin Elizabeth, expecting protection, support, perhaps even an army to restore her to Scotland's throne. Instead, she finds a gilded cage. Elizabeth faces an impossible dilemma. Mary is a queen, and the principle of royal legitimacy demands that anointed monarchs be protected from rebellious subjects. To abandon Mary would be to suggest that subjects can legitimately depose their rulers, a dangerous precedent for any monarch, especially one whose own legitimacy is questioned by Catholics throughout Europe. But Mary is also a threat. She is Catholic, granddaughter of Henry VIII's sister, Margaret Tudor, and in the eyes of Catholic Europe, the rightful Queen of England. The Pope never recognized Henry VIII's marriage to Anne Boleyn, which means, in Catholic theology, Elizabeth is illegitimate, and Mary is the true heir to England's throne. Mary is 25 years old, the same age Elizabeth was when she became queen. She is beautiful, charismatic, romantic in a way that Elizabeth has deliberately avoided. She has been married 3 times, twice widowed, once divorced by force. She has a son, James, now King of Scotland, in her place. Everything about Mary is what Elizabeth is not, passionate rather than calculating, impulsive rather than cautious, a woman who followed her heart and paid catastrophically for it. Elizabeth refuses to meet Mary in person. It is a calculated decision, one that will hold for 19 years. To meet would be to acknowledge Mary as an equal, to create a relationship of obligation and sentiment that could compromise necessary decisions. Elizabeth keeps Mary at a distance, geographically, politically, emotionally. Mary is moved to Bolton Castle in Yorkshire, comfortable but confined. She is not free to leave, nor is she formally imprisoned. Her status is deliberately ambiguous, guest or prisoner, cousin or rival, victim or threat. The ambiguity serves Elizabeth's purposes, allowing her to adjust Mary's treatment as circumstances require. William Cecil, Elizabeth's chief minister, sees Mary clearly as a danger that must be neutralized. He argues for imprisonment for keeping Mary isolated from English Catholics who might rally to her cause, for treating her as the political weapon she is. Robert Dudley is less certain, torn between Protestant solidarity and chivalric sympathy for a queen in distress. Elizabeth herself is caught between principle and pragmatism. She understands Mary's plight, knows what it means to be a queen without power, to depend on others' mercy, to live under constant suspicion. She has been there herself, in the Tower at Woodstock, waiting to learn if she would live or die. But she also knows that mercy can be fatal, that sentiment is a luxury monarchs cannot afford. The plots begin almost immediately. In 1569, Catholic earls in northern England rebel, hoping to free Mary, depose Elizabeth, and restore Catholic worship. The Northern Rebellion is crushed with brutal efficiency. Over 450 rebels executed, their lands forfeited to the crown. Mary's presence in England has already provoked violence, confirming Cecil's warnings. In 1570, Pope Pius V issues a papal bull excommunicating Elizabeth and releasing English Catholics from their allegiance to her. The bull declares Elizabeth a heretic and usurper, encourages her subjects to rebel, and promises divine blessing to anyone who removes her from the throne. It is an invitation to assassination, a declaration that killing Elizabeth would be not murder, but holy service. The political landscape shifts. English Catholics are now forced to choose between their religion and their queen. Most choose loyalty to Elizabeth, but some do not. And Mary becomes the natural focus for every Catholic conspiracy, the alternative queen around whom plots crystallize. In 1571, Francis Walsingham's spy network uncovers the Ridolfi plot. Roberto Ridolfi, a Florentine banker, has organized a conspiracy involving Spanish troops, English Catholic nobles, and Mary herself. The plan is to assassinate Elizabeth, free Mary, marry her to Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, and place her on England's throne with Spanish military support. Walsingham's agents intercept letters, break codes, interrogate conspirators. The evidence against Mary is suggestive, but not conclusive. She knew of the plot, encouraged it, but carefully avoided explicit written consent to assassinating Elizabeth. Norfolk is less careful. He is tried for treason and executed in June 1572. Parliament demands Mary's execution as well. The evidence of her involvement in plots against Elizabeth's life is clear enough for them. But Elizabeth refuses. She will not execute an anointed queen, will not set that precedent, will not become the monarch who kills her own cousin. She increases Mary's confinement instead, moving her to more secure locations, restricting her correspondence, tightening the surveillance. The years pass in this stalemate. Mary remains in captivity, moved from castle to castle, Tutbury, Sheffield, Chartley, always comfortable, always watched, always hoping for rescue that never comes. She embroiders, writes letters, maintains her royal household on Elizabeth's grudging allowance, and waits. Elizabeth's ministers grow increasingly frustrated. They see Mary as a constant danger, a rallying point for every discontented Catholic, a focus for Spanish and French ambitions. They want her dead, but Elizabeth will not give the order. Perhaps Elizabeth sees something of herself in Mary, another woman trying to survive in a world designed to destroy female power, another queen trapped by circumstances beyond her control. Perhaps she remembers her own imprisonment and cannot quite bring herself to impose the ultimate penalty. Perhaps she simply recognizes that executing Mary would create a martyr more dangerous than the living woman. Or perhaps Elizabeth understands that as long as Mary lives, Catholic plotters focus on rescuing her rather than simply assassinating Elizabeth and installing some other Catholic claimant. Mary alive and imprisoned is a known threat, manageable through surveillance and isolation. Mary dead becomes a symbol, and symbols are harder to control than prisoners. So the Scottish problem persists year after year. Mary writes letters protesting her treatment, declaring her innocence, appealing to Elizabeth's mercy and sense of justice. Elizabeth writes back occasionally cool letters that acknowledge kinship while offering no freedom, expressing regret while changing nothing. In 1586, a letter Elizabeth writes to Mary reveals her frustration. "You have planned to take my life and ruin my kingdom. I never proceeded so harshly against you." The words carry both accusation and a strange sadness. The recognition that these two women, cousins, queens, survivors, have been trapped together in a relationship neither wanted, bound by blood and politics, into a deadly dance that can only end one way. But Elizabeth is not ready yet to end it. Not quite yet. Mary remains confined, waiting, hoping, plotting, while Elizabeth rules, worries, and postpones the decision she knows will eventually be unavoidable. The Scottish problem lives on, a constant shadow over Elizabethan England, a reminder that threats can come from within as well as without, and that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who share your blood. Chapter 11. Walsingham's Web. In a modest house in London, Francis Walsingham sits at a desk covered with letters. Some are written in obvious code, numbers substituting for letters, symbols replacing names. Others appear innocent, discussions of trade, family news, requests for money, but contain hidden messages written in invisible ink or concealed between the lines. Walsingham reads them all with the patient attention of a scholar parsing difficult Latin, which, in a sense, is exactly what he is doing. The codes must be broken. The invisible ink must be revealed with heat or chemicals. The innocent phrases must be understood in their sinister context. This is the work of England's first organized intelligence network, and Walsingham is its architect and master. He becomes Elizabeth's principal secretary in 1573, replacing William Cecil in the day-to-day management of government, while Cecil moves to the position of Lord Treasurer. Walsingham is 41 years old, a committed Protestant who witnessed the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in Paris, the slaughter of thousands of Protestants in a single night of Catholic violence. The experience shaped him, hardened him, convinced him that Protestant England survives only through constant vigilance and ruthless action. Elizabeth does not entirely trust Walsingham's zeal. His Protestantism is more fervent than hers, his willingness to act more decisive, his moral certainty more absolute. But she recognizes his talent and his loyalty, and she desperately needs what he offers: information. Walsingham understands that in an age of religious conspiracy, intelligence is survival. Catholic powers, Spain, France, Rome, see Protestant England as an abomination to be destroyed. Catholic exiles plot Elizabeth's assassination from safe havens abroad. Catholic priests trained in seminaries at Rome and Douai slip back into England to minister to the faithful and, sometimes, to conspire. English Catholics must choose between their queen and their faith, and some choose faith. Against these threats, Walsingham builds a network that spans Europe and beyond. He recruits spies in France, Spain, Scotland, the Low Countries, Italy, even Turkey and North Africa. Some are English agents placed abroad. Others are locals who can be bribed, threatened, or persuaded to provide information. Still others are double agents, pretending loyalty to Catholic conspirators while actually serving Walsingham. His methods are sophisticated for the age. He uses codes and ciphers, employing mathematicians to break enemy encryptions while developing unbreakable codes for English communications. He intercepts mail, steaming open diplomatic pouches, copying letters, resealing them so recipients never know they have been read. He places informants in prisons who befriend Catholic prisoners and report their conversations. He infiltrates Catholic seminaries, placing Protestant agents among the students to identify which priests being trained will return to England and where they plan to go. When these priests arrive, they walk into traps Walsingham has prepared months in advance. His intelligence network operates on multiple levels. At the highest level, he maintains contacts in foreign courts, ambassadors, secretaries, disgruntled courtiers who can report on the plans of kings and popes. At the middle level, he tracks the movements of known conspirators, Catholic nobles, and suspected traitors. At the lowest level, he monitors ports, watches roads, and maintains a network of informants who report suspicious strangers or unusual activities. The work is expensive. Parliament grants some funds, but never enough. Walsingham pays many of his agents from his own fortune, spending thousands of pounds annually to maintain the intelligence apparatus that keeps Elizabeth alive. He will die in debt, his estate bankrupt, having sacrificed his personal wealth for Protestant England's survival. His greatest asset is patience. He does not simply arrest conspirators the moment he discovers them. Instead, he watches, listens, allows plots to develop until he understands the full network of participants. He uses captured conspirators to identify others, offering mercy for cooperation, threatening torture for resistance. His methods are not gentle, but they are effective. He builds a team of specialists. Thomas Philippes becomes his chief codebreaker, capable of deciphering the most complex encryptions. Arthur Gregory masters the art of forging seals, allowing intercepted letters to be resealed so perfectly that recipients never suspect tampering. A network of agents provocateurs infiltrate Catholic circles, sometimes encouraging plots so they can be exposed and crushed. The intelligence Walsingham gathers flows to Elizabeth and Cecil in regular reports. Who is plotting what? Which foreign powers support which conspirators? Which English nobles harbor Catholic sympathies? Which ports are being used to smuggle priests into England? The information shapes policy, guides diplomacy, identifies threats before they mature into action. Walsingham's personal motto is, "There is less danger in fearing too much than too little." He operates on the assumption that England is always in danger, that Catholics are always plotting, that vigilance can never be relaxed. Some consider him paranoid. Others recognize that his paranoia has kept Elizabeth alive through 2 decades when dozens of plots have sought her death. In his office, lit by candlelight, Walsingham reads another intercepted letter. This one mentions beer barrels being delivered to a certain manor house. To most readers, it would seem innocent. But Walsingham's network has reported that messages to Mary Queen of Scots are being smuggled in beer barrels. He makes a note. He will watch this correspondence carefully. He suspects something significant is developing, a plot larger than the usual conspiracies. He is right. The Babington plot is forming, and when it fully reveals itself, it will finally give him the evidence needed to destroy the Scottish problem once and for all. Chapter 12. Winds and Fire. July 1588. Along the southern coast of England, beacon fires stand ready on hilltops and church towers, forming a chain of warning stretching from Cornwall to Kent. On Friday, July 19th, a fishing boat returns to Penzance with news that electrifies the nation. The Spanish Armada has been sighted off the Lizard. Within hours, flames leap skyward from the first beacon. The signal passes from hill to hill, fire answering fire across the English countryside. By nightfall, London knows the Spanish fleet has arrived. Philip II of Spain has spent 3 years preparing this invasion. The Grande y Felicissima Armada, the great and most fortunate navy, comprises 130 ships carrying approximately 30,000 men. The fleet includes massive galleons, supply ships, and vessels designed to transport the Duke of Parma's battle-hardened army from the Spanish Netherlands to England's shore. Philip's plan is methodical. The Armada will sail up the English Channel, rendezvous with Parma's 27,000 troops at Calais, then escort the invasion force across the narrow strait to land in Kent. Once ashore, this combined Spanish force, experienced soldiers who have crushed Protestant resistance in the Netherlands, will march on London, depose the heretic queen, and restore Catholic rule to England. It is the largest invasion fleet ever assembled against England. Spain is the superpower of the age, its empire spanning the globe, its treasury filled with New World silver. England is a small island kingdom with limited resources and an untested navy. The Armada sails in a tight crescent formation, the largest galleons in the center, smaller vessels protecting the flanks. It is an impressive sight, sails filling the horizon, flags and banners streaming, the embodiment of Spanish power and papal blessing. Pope Sixtus V has granted this enterprise his approval, calling it a crusade to return England to the Catholic faith. But the Spanish face problems they have not fully anticipated. The Duke of Medina Sidonia, commanding the Armada, is an aristocrat appointed by Philip after the originally designated admiral died. Medina Sidonia is competent but inexperienced in naval warfare, and he has expressed grave doubts about the campaign's prospects. His concerns prove prescient. The English fleet, commanded by Lord Charles Howard of Effingham, with Sir Francis Drake as Vice Admiral, comprises roughly 200 ships, though only 55 to 65 are true warships. But these English vessels possess crucial advantages. They are smaller, faster, more maneuverable than the Spanish galleons. More importantly, they carry long-range cannons that can fire more rapidly and accurately than Spanish guns. The Spanish strategy relies on getting close enough to board English ships where their superior infantry would dominate hand-to-hand combat. The English strategy is to avoid being boarded, to stay at a distance, and to pound the Spanish fleet with cannon fire. For a week, the two fleets engage in running battles up the English Channel. Near Plymouth, off Portland Bill, by the Isle of Wight, the English harass the Armada, darting in to fire broadsides, then withdrawing before the Spanish can close for boarding. The crescent formation holds, but Spanish ships are damaged, supplies are consumed, and the invasion force makes slow progress. Elizabeth, meanwhile, prepares England for land defense. Militia troops gather at strategic points. Fortifications are hastened. A massive chain is stretched across the Thames estuary to block any Spanish penetration to London. At Tilbury, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, assembles an army to defend the approaches to the capital. On August 8th, Elizabeth rides to Tilbury to address the troops. She wears a silver breastplate over a white velvet dress, carrying a silver truncheon. She is 54 years old, unmarried, without sons to fight for her, facing the greatest military threat of her reign. Her speech becomes legendary. I know I have the body of a weak, feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too, and think foul scorn that Parma or Spain or any prince of Europe should dare to invade the borders of my realm. The words are defiance and theater, vulnerability and strength interwoven. She transforms her gender from weakness into an asset, her very presence an act of courage. Meanwhile, the naval battle reaches its climax. On August 6th, the Armada anchors at Calais, waiting for Parma's army to embark. But Parma is not ready. His troops cannot board, while Dutch rebels blockade the shallow ports. The Armada sits exposed in an open roadstead, vulnerable. Just after midnight on August 8th, the English send 8 fire ships into the anchored fleet. These are vessels loaded with pitch and gunpowder, set ablaze and aimed at the Spanish formation. The Spanish captains, terrified of explosion and fire spreading through the closely packed fleet, cut their anchor cables and scatter into the darkness. The next morning, the Spanish fleet is in chaos. Ships separated, anchors lost, formation broken. The English attack at dawn off Grove lines. For 8 hours, English guns hammer the disorganized Spanish vessels. The battle is fierce, the English outnumbering the Spanish and pressing their advantage ruthlessly. The Spanish fight bravely, but they cannot close the distance, cannot bring their boarding tactics into play. English cannons tear through hulls, topple masts, kill crews. When the wind shifts, threatening to drive Spanish ships onto the Flemish shoals, Medina Sidonia orders the fleet to sail north, abandoning the invasion plan, seeking only escape. The English pursue into the North Sea, then turn back when their ammunition runs low. The Armada continues north around Scotland, attempting to return to Spain by sailing around Ireland. What follows is disaster compounded by catastrophe. Chapter 13. The Golden Age. The Spanish Armada's defeat sends shockwaves through Europe and transforms England's self-image overnight. The small island kingdom that stood alone against the world's greatest empire has survived. More than survived, it has triumphed. Church bells ring across England. Thanksgiving services fill cathedrals. A commemorative medal is struck bearing the inscription, "God blew, and they were scattered." Elizabeth becomes Gloriana, the virgin warrior queen blessed by Providence. The victory confirms what Protestant England wants to believe, that God favors their cause, that their queen is chosen, that their nation has a divine destiny. But amid the celebrations, Elizabeth grieves privately. Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, her companion for 30 years, the man she perhaps loved, dies unexpectedly in September 1588, just weeks after sharing the triumph at Tilbury. She locks herself away, refusing to emerge until her counselors break down the door. In the famous Armada portrait, painted to commemorate the victory, she reportedly wears the pearls Dudley left her in his will. Yet she recovers, as she always does, and presides over what becomes known as England's Golden Age, a flowering of culture, exploration, and national confidence that will define the Elizabethan era for centuries. London in the 1580s and 1590s pulses with creative energy. The city's population swells past 200,000, making it one of Europe's largest urban centers. The Thames is crowded with vessels, merchant ships, fishing boats, wherries ferrying passengers between the banks. New buildings rise, great houses for nobles, shops for merchants, theaters for the growing appetite for drama. The theaters are Elizabeth's particular legacy. In 1576, James Burbage built the theater in Shoreditch, the first permanent playhouse in England. Others follow: the Curtain, the Rose, the Swan. In 1599, the globe rises on the bankside, a 3-story circular structure open to the sky, where groundlings stand in the pit for a penny, while wealthier patrons sit in covered galleries. William Shakespeare is writing at the height of his powers. Romeo and Juliet, A Midsummer Night's Dream, The Merchant of Venice, Henry Thurther. The plays pour forth with astonishing speed and brilliance. Elizabeth attends performances, delights in the wordplay and spectacle, reportedly requests a command performance of The Merry Wives of Windsor because she wants to see Falstaff in love. Christopher Marlowe writes Dr. Faustus and Tamburlaine the Great before his mysterious death in a tavern brawl in 1593. Ben Jonson produces satirical comedies that skewer social pretension. The stage becomes a mirror of Elizabethan society, its ambitions, anxieties, dreams, and contradictions. Edmund Spenser publishes The Faerie Queene, an epic poem that celebrates Elizabeth as the embodiment of virtue, chastity, and justice. The allegory is transparent. Gloriana, the Faerie Queene herself, represents Elizabeth, and the poem's knights represent the virtues needed to serve her and Protestant England. Poetry flourishes at court and beyond. Sir Philip Sidney writes Astrophel and Stella, transforming the sonnet into an English art form. The Earl of Oxford, Walter Raleigh, and dozens of lesser-known poets compete to craft the perfect verse, the cleverest conceit, the most elegant compliment to their queen. Music fills Elizabeth's court. She employs the finest composers of the age. William Byrd, though a Catholic recusant who refuses to attend Protestant services, serves as organist at the Chapel Royal, creating masses, motets, and keyboard works of extraordinary beauty. Thomas Tallis composes the 40-part motet Spem in Alium, a sonic cathedral of interwoven voices. Elizabeth herself plays the virginals skillfully, practices daily, and is known to dance well into her 60s. Portraiture becomes propaganda. Elizabeth's image is carefully controlled, distributed across England in paintings that emphasize her majesty, wisdom, and eternal youth. The Armada portrait shows her with her hand on a globe, windows behind her displaying the English victory and Spanish defeat, pearls symbolizing virginity, an ermine representing purity. These are not realistic portraits, but icons designed to project power and inspire devotion. The visual language develops its own vocabulary. Elizabeth is painted with symbolic objects, sieves representing the Vestal Virgin who proved her chastity by carrying water in a sieve, pelicans symbolizing self-sacrifice for her people, phoenixes suggesting resurrection and uniqueness, rainbows promising peace after storm. As she ages, the portraits grow more stylized, more fantastical, showing an ageless queen who exists outside time. Elizabeth cultivates this image through her famous progresses, extended summer journeys through the countryside, visiting the estates of nobles and the homes of gentlemen. The progresses serve multiple purposes. They allow the queen to be seen by her subjects, strengthening loyalty through personal presence. They distribute the expense of maintaining the royal household among her wealthier subjects, who must host her and her enormous retinue. They provide intelligence about conditions in the realm, and they offer entertainment and spectacle. The progresses are elaborate affairs. Elizabeth might travel with 300 carts carrying her belongings, 2,400 horses, and hundreds of courtiers and servants. Her hosts spend fortunes on banquets, masks, pageants, and gifts. Robert Dudley's entertainment at Kenilworth Castle in 1575 lasts 19 days and costs him what would be millions in modern currency. But these cultural achievements unfold against the backdrop of real hardship for many. The 1590s bring bad harvests, rising food prices, economic depression, and plague. London suffers periodic outbreaks that close the theaters and kill thousands. Poor relief becomes a pressing issue, leading to the Poor Laws of 1597 and 1601, which attempt to distinguish between the deserving poor, who cannot work, and the idle poor, who will not. The wealth generated by trade, exploration, and privateering is distributed wildly unequally. Nobles and successful merchants prosper. The middling sort, skilled craftsmen, shopkeepers, prosperous farmers, do reasonably well. But laborers, rural poor, and those displaced by agricultural changes struggle. Yet the image of the Golden Age persists, partly because Elizabeth and her court work tirelessly to project it. The reality is more complex, more troubled, more human than the myth. But myths have their own power, and the myth of Gloriana presiding over a golden age of English culture becomes a truth that shapes how England sees itself for centuries to come. In the playhouses, on the pages of poetry, in the portraits that hang in great houses, in the music that soars through the chapel royal, Elizabeth's England creates art that will outlast empires. The small island kingdom, defeated by force of arms, discovers it can conquer by force of imagination instead. Chapter 14. Expansion and Exploration. December 1577. The Golden Hind slips quietly out of Plymouth Harbor, carrying Francis Drake and a crew of 164 men on what the official records call a trading voyage to the Mediterranean. It is a lie. Elizabeth knows exactly where Drake is going and what he plans to do: sail around the world, raid Spanish ports, and treasure ships along the Pacific coast of South America, and demonstrate that English power can reach anywhere Spanish arrogance claims dominion. 3 years later, in September 1580, Drake returns. Of the 5 ships that departed, only the Golden Hind survives the circumnavigation. Of the 164 men, fewer than 60 return alive. But the ship's holds overflow with Spanish treasure, gold, silver, pearls, spices, worth perhaps $600,000, more than England's entire national debt when Elizabeth took the throne. Drake becomes a national hero overnight. Elizabeth knights him aboard his ship at Deptford, a calculated insult to Philip II of Spain. The ceremony makes Drake one of the most famous men in England and confirms Elizabeth's willingness to challenge Spanish monopoly on the seas. Drake's voyage opens English eyes to global possibilities. If one ship can sail around the world and return laden with treasure, what might a concerted effort achieve? The age of English exploration begins in earnest. Walter Raleigh becomes Elizabeth's new favorite in the 1580s, brilliant, ambitious, a poet and soldier who dreams of English colonies in the New World. In 1584, Elizabeth grants him a charter to establish settlements in lands not actually possessed of any Christian prince. The target is North America's eastern coast, which Raleigh names Virginia in honor of his Virgin Queen. In 1585, Raleigh sends 108 colonists to Roanoke Island, off the coast of present-day North Carolina. The settlement struggles from the beginning. The colonists are ill-prepared for the realities of establishing a self-sufficient community. They arrive too late to plant crops. Relations with local Native American tribes alternate between cooperation and hostility. Supplies run short. When Francis Drake stops at Roanoke in 1586 after raiding Spanish settlements in the Caribbean, most colonists beg to return to England. They abandon the colony after barely a year. Raleigh tries again in 1587, sending 117 colonists, including women and children. Virginia Dare is born on August 18, 1587, the first English child born in the Americas. The colony's governor, John White, returns to England for supplies, but the Spanish Armada crisis prevents his return until 1590. When White finally reaches Roanoke, the settlement is deserted. The colonists have vanished without trace, leaving only the word Croatoan carved on a post. To this day, no one knows their fate. The lost colony of Roanoke becomes one of history's enduring mysteries. Despite these failures, the attempts establish English claims to North American territory. Future colonization efforts under James first will build on these foundations, creating settlements that endure and eventually expand into a vast colonial empire. Elsewhere, English merchants and explorers push into new markets. The Muscovy Company, established in 1555, trades with Russia through the Arctic port of Archangel. The Levant Company opens trade with the Ottoman Empire. The Eastland Company attempts commerce with Baltic ports, though with limited success. The most significant venture comes at the very end of Elizabeth's reign. On December 31st, 1600, she grants a charter to the East India Company, giving it monopoly rights to trade with Asia. The company begins modestly, sending a few ships to compete with Portuguese and Dutch traders for spices, silk, and other Eastern luxuries. The East India Company will grow into something no one in 1600 can imagine, a trading company that becomes a colonial power, that will eventually rule India, that will shape global commerce and politics for centuries. But in 1600, it is simply another attempt to break into markets dominated by other European powers. Elizabeth supports exploration and trade expansion, not from ideological conviction about empire, but from practical calculation. New trade routes mean new customs revenue. Privateering raids on Spanish ships enrich the crown without requiring expensive naval campaigns. Colonies, if they succeed, could provide raw materials and markets for English goods. The results during her reign are mixed. The colonies fail. The trading companies struggle against established competitors. But the foundations are laid. English sailors learn to navigate global waters. English merchants establish contacts in distant ports. English ambitions expand beyond Europe's shores. When Elizabeth dies in 1603, England is not yet a colonial power, but it is becoming one, ship by ship, voyage by voyage, failure by failure, that teaches lessons for future success. The small island kingdom is reaching outward, and the world will never be quite the same. Chapter 15. The Cost of Stability. The 1590s arrive with a bitterness that belies the golden image. England's last decade under Elizabeth is marked not by triumph, but by grinding hardship, not by celebration, but by survival. The golden age, it turns out, was never as golden for everyone, and now even the illusion begins to crack under the weight of war, weather, and want. The war with Spain continues year after year, draining resources that England can ill afford. The Armada's defeat in 1588 was glorious, but it did not end the conflict. Philip II rebuilds his fleet and sends 2 more armadas in 1596 and 1597, both scattered by storms before reaching England, but requiring constant vigilance and expensive naval preparations. England is locked in a war of attrition with the world's most powerful empire, and the costs accumulate relentlessly. Elizabeth sends troops to the Netherlands to support Dutch rebels fighting Spanish occupation. She sends forces to France to help Protestant Henry IV against Catholic opposition. Both campaigns consume men and money without producing decisive victories. English soldiers die in muddy trenches far from home, fighting for causes that bring little tangible benefit to England itself. Ireland becomes an open wound. The Irish, Catholic, and resentful of English Protestant rule, rebel repeatedly. Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, leads a sophisticated resistance that defeats English forces at the Battle of the Yellow Ford in 1598, one of England's worst military disasters. Elizabeth sends her favorite, the Earl of Essex, with an army of 17,000 men to crush the rebellion. Essex fails spectacularly, wastes resources, disobeys orders, and returns to England in disgrace. The Irish campaign alone costs over $2 million, a staggering sum that dwarfs all of Elizabeth's careful fiscal management from earlier decades. By 1600, England is spending more on Ireland than on all other military operations combined. The financial burden falls on everyone. Elizabeth is forced to request parliamentary subsidies repeatedly, the very thing she avoided for most of her reign. She sells crown lands to raise cash, mortgaging the future for the present. She grants more monopolies to courtiers, giving individuals exclusive rights to trade in commodities like salt, starch, playing cards, and even basic goods. The monopolies enrich a few while raising prices for everyone else. Parliament, when it meets in 1601, erupts in anger over the monopolies. Members of Parliament denounce the system as corrupt and oppressive. Elizabeth, sensing genuine danger, makes one of her last great political maneuvers. She promises to reform the monopoly system, expresses shock that her grants have been abused, and delivers what becomes known as her golden speech. "Though God hath raised me high," she tells Parliament, "yet this I count the glory of my crown, that I have reigned with your loves." She positions herself with her subjects against corrupt courtiers, transforming a political crisis into an affirmation of mutual devotion. But words cannot feed the hungry. The harvests fail year after year. In 1594, 1595, 1596, and 1597, rain ruins crops across England. Grain prices soar, increasing by 400% over the course of Elizabeth's reign. For laborers whose wages have not kept pace with inflation, this means hunger. For the poorest, it means starvation. Contemporary estimates suggest that by the late 1590s, up to 30% of England's population lives in poverty. Vagrants crowd the roads, displaced agricultural workers, unemployed soldiers returning from foreign wars, craftsmen whose trades have failed. They move from parish to parish seeking work or charity, creating fear among settled communities who see them as threats to order. Elizabeth's government responds with the Poor Laws of 1597 and 1601. These acts represent England's first systematic attempt at social welfare, establishing that each parish must care for its own poor through local taxation. The laws distinguish between different categories of need: the impotent poor, who cannot work, the elderly, the disabled, orphaned children, deserve relief. The able-bodied poor, who can work but cannot find employment, should be given work. The idle poor, who refuse to work, should be punished. It is a harsh system, more concerned with preventing disorder than alleviating suffering, but it acknowledges governmental responsibility for the destitute. The parish-based poor relief structure will persist for over 2 centuries, shaping English social policy long after Elizabeth is gone. Plague strikes repeatedly. London suffers outbreaks in 1592, 1593, and 1603 that kill tens of thousands. The disease shows no mercy. Rich and poor alike fall victim, though the crowded conditions where the poor live accelerate its spread. The theaters close during outbreaks. Trade contracts. Fear permeates daily life. The human cost of Elizabeth's reign becomes impossible to ignore. The stability she provided came at a price: religious conformity enforced through fines and imprisonment. Catholic priests hunted, tortured, and executed. Irish resistance crushed with brutal efficiency. The poor managed rather than helped. Wars fought year after year without resolution. Elizabeth herself grows weary. She is in her 60s now, an extraordinary age for the time. Her teeth are black and rotting. Her face is painted with the white lead makeup that may be slowly poisoning her. Her once red hair is gone, replaced by elaborate wigs. She dresses in magnificent gowns heavy with jewels, projecting majesty even as her body fails. She no longer dances through the night. She still rides, but not as vigorously. The courtiers who remember her in her prime see the difference, though none dare speak of it. The portraits grow more stylized, more fantastical, depicting an ageless icon rather than a mortal woman approaching 70. The people who celebrated the Armada victory in 1588 face a different England in 1598. The war continues, prices rise, harvests fail. The queen, who promised to be married to her kingdom, presides over suffering she cannot prevent and struggles she can barely manage. Yet England endures. The religious settlement holds. The government functions. The succession, though unresolved, has not descended into civil war. Trade continues despite hardships. Culture flourishes even amid economic depression. The theater companies perform through plague years when allowed, creating art that transcends immediate misery. The cost of stability is high, measured in treasure spent, lives lost, suffering endured. But instability's cost would be higher still. Civil war, foreign invasion, the collapse of order into chaos. Elizabeth has given England 40 years of survival. Whether survival alone is enough, whether the price has been worth paying, will be debated for centuries. For now, in the grinding years of the 1590s, survival is achievement enough. The fires burn low. The Queen grows old. The century approaches its end. Chapter 16. Twilight of the Advisors. September 4th, 1588. Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, dies at Cornbury Park, just weeks after Elizabeth's triumph at Tilbury. He is 55 years old, worn out by a lifetime of military campaigns, political maneuvering, and the constant tension of being the Queen's favorite. When the news reaches Elizabeth, she locks herself in her chamber and refuses to emerge. Her counselors wait outside, concerned, then alarmed, finally desperate. They break down the door to find her consumed by grief for the man she has known since childhood, the one person who perhaps understood her completely, the companion of 40 years whom she kept close but never married. She keeps his final letter to her for the rest of her life. Years later, after her own death, it will be found among her most private possessions, marked in her handwriting, his last letter. The loss of Leicester begins a decade of endings, a gradual dimming of the constellation of brilliant minds and loyal servants who built and sustained Elizabethan England. In 1590, Francis Walsingham dies, his fortune spent maintaining the spy network that kept Elizabeth alive through countless conspiracies. He dies in debt, having sacrificed his personal wealth to Protestant England's security. Elizabeth does not attend his funeral. Perhaps she cannot bear another public display of grief. Perhaps she resents that even in death, Walsingham costs her nothing, while having cost himself everything. With Walsingham gone, the intelligence network loses its master architect. His successors continue the work, but without his intuitive understanding of conspiracy, his patient willingness to watch and wait before striking, his absolute dedication that transcended personal cost. William Cecil, Lord Burghley, lingers longer, but age takes its toll. He is 77 in 1598, having served Elizabeth for 40 years, longer than she has reigned. He suffers from gout, moves with difficulty, requires assistance to attend council meetings. His mind remains sharp, but his body fails. Elizabeth visits him during his final illness, feeding him soup with her own hands. It is an extraordinary gesture. Queens do not typically nurse their ministers, but Cecil has been more than a minister. He has been her chief advisor, her steady hand, the man who translated her vision into policy and her commands into action. When he dies on August 4th, 1598, Elizabeth loses the last connection to her accession, the final link to the young woman who became queen 40 years earlier with nothing but intelligence and determination. She writes that she has lost a most faithful counselor and a most singular good friend. Cecil's son, Robert, inherits his father's position, becoming Elizabeth's new chief minister. Robert Cecil is capable, intelligent, ruthless in his own way. But he is not his father. He lacks William Cecil's patience, his instinct for compromise, his deep personal loyalty to Elizabeth that transcended policy disagreements. The court is changing, filling with younger men who do not remember the dangerous years under Mary, who take Elizabeth's stability for granted, who see an aging queen rather than the survivor who created the world they inhabit. Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, becomes Elizabeth's new favorite. He is Robert Dudley's stepson, handsome and charming like his stepfather, but lacking Dudley's political judgment and self-control. Essex is in his 20s when he first catches Elizabeth's attention. She is in her 50s. The age gap mirrors her earlier relationship with Dudley, but the dynamic is different, more troubled. Essex is arrogant, ambitious, convinced of his own military genius. He pushes for aggressive military action, for glorious campaigns that will make his reputation. Elizabeth indulges him, gives him commands, showers him with honors and gifts. But she also recognizes his limitations, his recklessness, his dangerous pride. When Essex leads the disastrous Irish campaign in 1599, returning without permission after accomplishing nothing, Elizabeth's patience breaks. She strips him of his offices and income. Essex, accustomed to favor and advancement, cannot accept disgrace. He broods, plots, convinces himself that Elizabeth is surrounded by evil counselors who poison her mind against him. On February 8, 1601, Essex attempts a coup. He marches through London with 300 armed followers, expecting the city to rise in his support. It does not. Londoners watch his desperate parade and close their doors. By evening, Essex is under arrest. By February 25th, he is dead, executed for treason at the age of 34. Elizabeth signs his death warrant without the hesitation that tormented her over Mary, Queen of Scots. Essex is not a rival queen, but a failed favorite, not a political necessity, but a personal betrayal. His execution is swift, decisive, final, but it costs her. Essex was the last of her favorites, the final young man who brought energy and vitality to an aging court. With him gone, the court feels emptier, older, the shadows longer. Elizabeth is 67 years old. The men who built her reign are dead or dying. The younger generation serves Robert Cecil, positioning themselves for the transition they know is coming. They correspond secretly with James VI of Scotland. Preparing for the succession, Elizabeth refuses to name officially. She knows they do this. She allows it because she is practical enough to recognize that government must continue after her death, that some preparation is necessary. But she does not acknowledge it, does not give formal blessing, maintains the fiction that she will reign forever. The court becomes a strange place, a dying woman projecting eternal youth through paint and costume, surrounded by courtiers who defer to her publicly while privately planning for her absence. The twilight deepens. The generation that made Elizabethan England fades into memory. The Queen remains increasingly alone, holding on to power, because power is all she has ever fully trusted, all she has ever fully possessed. Chapter 17. The Succession. Silence. For 45 years, from the moment she becomes queen until her final breath, Elizabeth refuses to name her heir. It is the defining anxiety of her reign, the question that haunts every parliament, consumes her councillors, and keeps England in a state of perpetual uncertainty. The pressure begins immediately. Her first parliament in 1559 urges her to marry and settle the succession. She deflects with gracious words and vague promises. Subsequent parliaments grow more insistent, more desperate. They see what she will not acknowledge. Without a named heir, her death could plunge England into civil war. In 1562, Elizabeth nearly dies of smallpox. For days, she lies unconscious, her life balanced on a blade's edge. The council gathers in panic, realizing they have no plan, no agreed successor, no way to prevent chaos if she dies. When she recovers, Parliament begs her to name an heir. She refuses. Her reasons are both political and personal. She remembers her own experience under Mary, how being heir presumptive made her the focus of every conspiracy, every plot, every rebel who wanted a different ruler. She knows that naming a successor creates a rival power center, that ambitious men will desert the setting sun for the rising. "Think you I could love my own winding sheet?" she asks when pressed. To name her successor is to imagine her own death, to make herself irrelevant while still living. But deeper than political calculation lies personal fear. Elizabeth has no children. To name her successor is to acknowledge the failure of her marriage policy, to admit that the Virgin Queen's virginity was not strength but barrenness, that the Tudor line ends with her. The leading candidate is obvious to everyone: James VI of Scotland, son of Mary Queen of Scots, Protestant despite his Catholic mother, direct descendant of Henry VII through Margaret Tudor. By blood and religion, James is the natural heir, but Elizabeth will not say his name. To acknowledge James is to acknowledge that Anne Boleyn's daughter will be succeeded by Mary Queen of Scots' son, that the woman she imprisoned for 19 years and finally executed will triumph through her offspring. The irony is too bitter. Other claimants exist, though none as strong as James. Arbella Stuart, also descended from Margaret Tudor, is raised in England and might have support. The Suffolk line, descendants of Henry VIII's younger sister Mary, has theoretical claims, though Henry VIII's will excluded them. Robert Persons, the Jesuit priest, publishes a book in 1595 examining 16 potential heirs, arguing that Parliament should choose rather than accept automatic hereditary succession. The book is banned in England, but it circulates anyway, feeding speculation and anxiety. Elizabeth's counselors grow increasingly desperate as she ages. Robert Cecil begins secret correspondence with James around 1600, preparing for a smooth transition without Elizabeth's knowledge or permission. The letters are carefully hidden, written in code, passed through trusted intermediaries. Cecil is committing treason in service of stability, betraying his queen to save her kingdom. Elizabeth probably knows. She is too intelligent, too well-informed through her own intelligence networks, not to suspect what Cecil is doing. But she does not stop him. Perhaps she recognizes the necessity. Perhaps she is simply too tired to care. Perhaps she trusts Cecil to manage what she cannot bring herself to address. Parliament meets for the last time in her reign in 1601. They do not raise the succession question. Everyone understands by now that she will never answer it, They have learned to live with uncertainty, to accept that this question will only be resolved by her death. And so England waits, holding its breath, watching an aging queen who refuses to acknowledge mortality, preparing in secret for a transition that cannot be spoken aloud. The silence persists. The question remains unanswered. The future hangs suspended, waiting for the moment when silence must finally break. Chapter 18. The Final Winter, January 1603. Elizabeth retreats to Richmond Palace, her favorite residence, the place she calls her warm box. She is 69 years old, her body finally admitting what her will has denied for years, that even queens are mortal, that even iron determination cannot hold back time forever. The winter is bitter, cold, seeping through stone walls, despite roaring fires in every hearth. Elizabeth moves through the palace wrapped in heavy furs, her painted face a mask of white lead and rouge, her elaborate gown stiff with jewels and embroidery. She still dresses as a queen every day, still maintains the performance of majesty even as her body rebels. In late January, her cousin Catherine Howard, Countess of Nottingham, dies. Catherine has been one of Elizabeth's closest companions, a lady of the bedchamber for decades, privy to the Queen's private moments, the rare person who sees beyond the royal mask to the woman beneath. The loss breaks something in Elizabeth. She has survived the deaths of so many, her mother, her siblings, Leicester, Walsingham, Burghley, Essex. But Catherine's death feels different, final, the last connection to her private self severing. After the funeral, Elizabeth sinks into a melancholy she cannot shake. She stops eating. Her ladies urge food upon her, but she pushes the plates away. She grows thin, her gowns hanging loose on a frame that has always been slender, but now becomes skeletal. She cannot sleep. At night, she paces her chambers, refusing to lie down, saying that if she goes to bed, she will never rise again. Her ladies place cushions on the floor, begging her to rest, but she stands for hours, leaning against pillows, her eyes open in the candlelight, watching shadows move across tapestried walls. She refuses medical treatment. Her physicians hover anxiously, offering potions and remedies, but Elizabeth waves them away. She has never trusted doctors, remembering perhaps that no medicine could save her father, her brother, her sister, any of the people she has lost. Her mind begins to wander. Sometimes she speaks to people long dead, to Leicester, to Cecil, to her father. Sometimes she weeps without explanation. Sometimes she sits in silence for hours, her ladies uncertain whether she sleeps or simply stares into spaces they cannot see. Robert Cecil and the Privy Council grow desperate. They need her to name her successor formally. England cannot afford the chaos of an uncertain succession. But Elizabeth will not speak the words they need to hear. By mid-March, she can barely stand. Her ladies finally persuade her to take to her bed on March 21st. She lies against pillows, her elaborate wig removed, her painted face wiped clean, revealing the reality she has hidden for so long, an old woman, exhausted, ready to let go. The Archbishop of Canterbury, John Whitgift, comes to pray with her. He kneels by her bed for hours, offering prayers for the dying, spiritual comfort for the journey ahead. Elizabeth, who has spent her life managing religion as politics, perhaps finds some genuine consolation in the familiar words. Her counselors gather, making final attempts to secure a formal declaration. When they ask if James VI of Scotland should succeed her, Elizabeth cannot speak. Illness has robbed her of the voice that commanded kingdoms, delivered speeches, charmed ambassadors, and deflected marriage proposals for 45 years. Instead, She raises her hands above her head, making a circle with her arms, the gesture of a crown. It is her final political act, acknowledging James as her heir through silent pantomime, giving England the succession it needs while maintaining to the last her refusal to speak it aloud. Through March 23rd, she lies quiet, breathing but barely conscious. Her ladies maintain vigil, watching for any sign, any request. But Elizabeth has said everything she will say. The performance is over. The Virgin Queen can finally rest. In the early hours of March 24th, 1603, between 2 and 3 in the morning, Elizabeth's breathing quiets, then stops. She dies as she lived, surrounded by attendants, but fundamentally alone, holding her secrets to the end, revealing nothing that she does not choose to reveal. The Archbishop of Canterbury pronounces her dead. The ladies of the bedchamber weep. The councillors exchange looks, grief mixed with relief, sorrow mixed with urgency. There is work to be done. Within hours, Robert Cecil proclaims James VI of Scotland as James I of England. Riders gallop north, carrying the news that will change Britain forever. The union of the crowns, England and Scotland, joined under a single monarch for the first time. The transition is remarkably smooth, exactly as Cecil planned in his secret correspondence. There are no riots, no competing claimants, no civil war. Elizabeth's refusal to name her heir could have been catastrophic, but Cecil's quiet treason has averted disaster. In her chamber at Richmond Palace, Elizabeth's body is prepared for lying in state. Her face is cleaned of the cosmetics that hid her age. Her body is embalmed. She will lie in Whitehall Palace for 3 weeks, allowing the nation to begin its mourning. The Virgin Queen is dead. The Tudor age has ended. A new century, a new dynasty, a new Britain begins. But first, England must bury the woman who shaped it for 45 extraordinary years. Chapter 19. What She Left Behind. April 28, 1603. London's streets overflow with mourners as Elizabeth's funeral procession moves slowly from Whitehall to Westminster Abbey. Thousands line the route, weeping openly for the Queen many have known their entire lives. The coffin is drawn on a chariot draped in purple velvet, topped with a life-sized effigy of Elizabeth dressed in her royal robes, crown upon her head, scepter in her hand. The procession includes everyone, from the highest nobles to the lowest servants of the royal household, the spice bag makers and wine porters and scullery maids who served her daily. In death, as in life, Elizabeth's presence commands attention, demands ceremony, refuses to be ignored. She is laid to rest in Westminster Abbey's Henry VII Chapel, eventually placed in the same vault as her half-sister Mary, under a monument erected by James I. The Latin inscription reads, "Partners in throne and grave, here we sleep Elizabeth and Mary, sisters in hope of the resurrection." The England Elizabeth leaves behind is transformed from the kingdom she inherited 45 years earlier. She found it bankrupt. She leaves it solvent. She found it religiously fractured and bleeding. She leaves it with a religious settlement that, however imperfect, has held. She found it isolated and vulnerable. She leaves it recognized as a significant European power with a formidable navy. The cultural legacy is extraordinary. Shakespeare, Marlowe, Spenser, the writers of the Elizabethan age will be read for centuries. The Church of England, her via media between Catholic and Protestant extremes, spreads across the globe through the British Empire. The defeat of the Spanish Armada becomes a defining moment of English national identity. But the costs were real. Catholics persecuted for their faith. Irish brutally suppressed in repeated military campaigns. The poor managed rather than genuinely helped. England's early involvement in the transatlantic slave trade, colonial ambitions that laid foundations for centuries of exploitation. Elizabeth never married, never had children, chose power over every personal relationship. She transformed her childlessness into political strength, the Virgin Queen married to England. But what did it cost her in private moments, in the loneliness of advanced age, in the knowledge that the Tudor line died with her? She was called Gloriana, but she was also called hesitant, manipulative, vain. She was celebrated for defeating Spain, but she left debts and unfinished wars. She created stability, but often through enforced conformity and calculated cruelty. History remembers her as one of England's greatest monarchs. The judgment seems fair. She took a broken kingdom and made it whole. She survived when survival seemed impossible. She ruled with intelligence and determination in an age that believed women incapable of both. The unwanted daughter became the architect of a nation's identity. The motherless child gave England stability. The woman who never married became married to history itself. Sweet dreams, and we'll meet again soon for another fall asleep story.